The crystal wine glass shattered in my hand as Robert's words hung in the air. "Merry Christmas, Emma. I want a divorce." My 15 closest friends sat frozen around our dining table, forks suspended midair, stunned expressions illuminated by the soft glow of Christmas lights. The elegant dinner I had spent 3 days preparing suddenly seemed like a cruel joke. In that moment, with divorce papers sliding across our mahogany table between the turkey and cranberry sauce, I realized our 12-year marriage had been nothing but an elaborate performance. "You can't be serious," I whispered, acutely aware of every eye in the room. Blood trickled from where the glass had cut my palm, staining the cream tablecloth I'd inherited from my grandmother. Robert's smile never reached his eyes as he leaned back in his chair. "Your little bakery hobby has been cute, but it's time we face reality. I need someone with ambition matching mine." The condescension in his voice was familiar. The same tone he'd used when I'd first mentioned opening my own bakery 4 years ago. Back then, I'd mistaken his dismissiveness for concern. Now, standing in our dining room with my business thriving while his pharmaceutical sales job stagnated, I recognized it for what it truly was: insecurity masked as superiority. My bakery, Sweet Foundations, had started in our kitchen with simple cookie orders for neighbors. Last month, we'd catered the mayor's daughter's wedding. 3 local newspapers had featured my custom cake designs. Just yesterday, a regional distributor had approached me about carrying my signature maple pecan breakfast rolls in stores across the state. As Robert continued his performance for our stunned audience, my mind flashed to the series of late-night calls he'd been receiving over the past 6 months. The unexplained weekend conferences that left no digital footprint. The growing coldness between us that I desperately tried to warm with homemade dinners and patience. "I've given you enough time to grow up," Robert announced, glancing around at our friends as if seeking validation. "The house, our lifestyle, these aren't sustainable on what you make selling cupcakes." Our friend Jessica, who had known us since college, placed her napkin on the table. "Robert, maybe this isn't the appropriate." "No, it's perfect timing," he interrupted. "New year, new beginnings. Emma can find somewhere more suited to her modest ambitions." The room fell silent except for the cheerful Christmas music still playing ironically in the background. Bing Crosby crooning about white Christmases while my life imploded in Technicolor. I thought about the mortgage statement that had arrived last week, the one addressed solely to me. The property taxes I'd paid from my separate account last quarter. The home insurance policy in my name alone. 3 years ago, when I'd noticed large unexplained withdrawals from our joint account, I hadn't confronted Robert. Instead, I'd quietly consulted with a financial advisor. When the perfect house in Oak Ridge Heights had come on the market, I'd used my growing bakery profits and a loan secured against my business to buy it outright, in my name only. At my lawyer's suggestion, I'd created a rental agreement that Robert had signed without reading, assuming it was routine paperwork for the homeowners association. "Actually," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "there's something you should know about this house." Robert's smug expression faltered slightly. I stood up, wiping my bleeding hand on a napkin. 3 weeks ago, I filed paperwork with the county court. You have until January 15th to vacate the premises. The satisfaction of watching color drain from his face almost compensated for the humiliation he'd orchestrated. "That's impossible," he sputtered. "We bought this house together." "No," I corrected him, retrieving a folder from the sideboard drawer. "I bought this house. Your name isn't on a single document." Our friend Marcus, a real estate attorney, winced in recognition. He'd helped me with the paperwork, sworn to secrecy by attorney-client privilege. Robert's face contorted with rage. "You're lying. The same way you lied about that business trip to Chicago last month?" I countered, surprising myself with my calm. "Funny thing, the hotel had no record of your reservation when I called to check." The hints had been there for months. The unfamiliar cologne lingering on his shirts, the sudden password changes on his phone, the mysterious cash withdrawals. I'd been piecing together the puzzle while he'd assumed I was too naive to notice. What Robert had never understood was that running a successful bakery required meticulous attention to detail, sharp business acumen, and the ability to plan several steps ahead. The same skills had served me well in quietly securing my future. "Everyone out," Robert demanded, glaring at our friends. "Now." No one moved. "I think you should leave, Robert," said Cameron, my oldest friend. "It seems you're the unwelcome one here." As Robert stormed upstairs, presumably to pack a bag, I felt the room spinning around me. Jessica placed a steadying hand on my shoulder while someone else cleaned up the broken glass. "How long have you known?" asked Rachel, refilling my wine glass. "Suspected for months," I admitted. "Confirmed it 6 weeks ago when I hired a private investigator." What the investigator had uncovered went far beyond an affair. The financial records, the suspicious meetings, the cash transactions. Robert had been hiding something much bigger than another woman. Something that had compelled me to file for both his eviction and an emergency separation of assets. "There's more," I said quietly. "Much more." As my friends rallied around me that Christmas Eve, I realized I had built something far more valuable than a successful bakery or a beautiful home. I had created a foundation of truth and self-reliance that would sustain me through whatever storms lay ahead. Outside, snow began to fall, covering our neighborhood in a clean white blanket, nature's way of suggesting we could all start fresh, even when our hearts were shattered by those we trusted most. As my friends helped clean up the Christmas Eve disaster, my mind traveled back to the exact moment I decided to protect myself. It wasn't dramatic. Just an ordinary Tuesday 3 years ago when I'd checked our online banking and found $12,000 missing from our joint savings. "It must be a mistake," Robert had said dismissively when I called him at work. "I'll handle it." The money reappeared 2 days later with no explanation. When I pressed him, he'd snapped, "Do you really want to question the person who pays for this roof over your head?" That night I couldn't sleep. His words echoed in my mind as I stared at our bedroom ceiling. The next morning, I called Diane Foster, a financial advisor I'd met at a women's business networking event months earlier. "I need to understand my options," I told her over coffee at a cafe far from our neighborhood. "Just in case." Diane's office had felt like a sanctuary, warm lighting, plants thriving on every surface, degrees and certifications framed on the wall. She listened without judgment as I detailed our financial arrangement. My growing bakery income going into a joint account, Robert controlling our investments, my name absent from our assets for tax purposes, as he'd always explained. "This is more common than you think," Diane said, sliding a folder across her desk. "Financial control is about power, not money." Inside was literature about financial abuse, a term I'd never connected to my own life. I read statistics about partners who weaponized money, who belittled businesses, who created dependency through financial control. Each point resonated like a bell in my chest. "I'm not saying this is your situation," Diane clarified. "But information is power. Let's start by creating your financial independence plan." Step 1 was opening my own accounts at a different bank. Step 2 was documenting my business growth properly, something Robert had discouraged, claiming it would complicate our taxes. I registered Sweet Foundations as an LLC the following week. When my first major wedding cake order came in, $2,800 for the Henderson Mitchell wedding, I deposited half in our joint account and half in my new business account. Robert never noticed. "Always plan as if you'll need to stand on your own," Diane advised during our monthly check-ins. "Hope for the best, prepare for independence." By the time our dream house in Oak Ridge Heights came on the market, Sweet Foundations was catering 3 events weekly. My separate account had grown steadily. Robert, meanwhile, had started coming home later, our conversations growing shorter. The distance between us expanded quietly like rising dough. "It's perfect timing," Robert had declared when we toured the house. "My bonus should cover the down payment." 2 days later, he'd mentioned temporary cash flow issues and suggested waiting. But the real estate market was hot, and the house, with its perfect kitchen and storefront potential in the converted garage, was everything I needed. That night I called Diane. "Can I qualify for this mortgage on my own?" I asked. The process wasn't easy. My business needed a professional valuation. I had to provide 2 years of meticulous income records. Thankfully, I'd been tracking everything against Diane's advice. The loan officer examined my credit score with skeptical eyes until she tasted my signature lemon lavender cupcakes. "These are worth investing in," she declared, stamping my application. The purchase required creative financing, a significant down payment from my savings, a business loan against future earnings, and a slightly higher interest rate than we would have qualified for jointly. But when I signed the final papers, my name alone on the deed, something shifted inside me. Security felt like a warm hearth I'd built with my own hands. "We should celebrate," the real estate agent said, handing me the keys. Instead, I drove to my parents' house and stored the original deed in their safe. Mom had squeezed my hand with unspoken understanding. At home, I presented Robert with the rental agreement drafted by Marcus, presenting it as routine homeowners association paperwork. He signed without reading, preoccupied with a work call. "Did you remember to add both our names to everything?" he asked absently. "Everything's taken care of," I'd answered truthfully. The bakery continued growing steadily. I hired my first employee, then my second. Each business decision I made without consulting Robert felt like planting another seed of independence. He noticed my confidence blossoming but misattributed it to the cute hobby keeping me busy. When I closed our remaining joint account 6 months ago, Robert didn't even notice. He was too preoccupied with his mysterious weekends away and secretive phone calls. I transferred my portion to my separate accounts and waited for him to mention it. He never did. Last month, reviewing my quarterly business finances with Diane, I'd shared my suspicions about Robert's behavior. "You've built something remarkable here," she said, indicating both my financial statements and the bakery's growing reputation. "Whatever happens next, you've created your safety net." I hadn't known then how soon I'd need it. Standing in my kitchen now as friends cleared away the ruins of our Christmas dinner, I felt a strange calm. The seeds of financial independence I'd planted years ago had grown into a protective forest. Whatever secrets Robert had been hiding, whatever storm approached, I was ready to weather it on my own terms. The morning after Christmas dawned with an eerie silence. Robert hadn't returned home, and the space he'd occupied in our lives seemed both glaringly empty and somehow lighter. I sat at the kitchen counter nursing a cup of coffee when my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Sarah Winters had been my friend since high school, but what few people in our social circle knew was that she'd become Detective Winters 5 years ago, working in the financial crimes unit. Her message was simple: "Ready when you are." I'd reached out to her 6 weeks earlier, when my suspicions about Robert had crystallized into something I couldn't ignore. Not after finding hotel receipts from Pittsburgh, a city he'd never mentioned visiting, and credit card statements for accounts I didn't recognize hidden in his desk drawer. "I don't normally mix friendship and work," Sarah had warned over lunch at a diner halfway between my bakery and the police station. "But what you're describing, it's concerning." I pushed my coffee aside and texted back, "Today. Please." Sarah arrived an hour later in plain clothes, her badge tucked discreetly in her pocket. She hugged me tightly before placing her laptop on the dining table, the same table where my marriage had publicly disintegrated 24 hours earlier. "You ready to see what we found?" she asked gently. The investigation had started small, Sarah helping me access public records I wouldn't have known to check. Property listings, court filings, business registrations. What we discovered was a trail of breadcrumbs leading to a life Robert had carefully concealed. "This is the apartment lease," Sarah said, pulling up a document. "Signed 14 months ago in Millfield." Millfield was barely 30 minutes away, a neighboring town where Robert claimed to visit a client every Thursday. The lease showed monthly payments of $1,400 for a 2-bedroom unit on Oakwood Drive. "And these are the utilities," she continued, displaying billing records. "All in his name." My hands trembled as I scrolled through the evidence. "Who lives there?" Sarah hesitated. "We can't be certain yet, but there are social media posts suggesting regular occupancy." She pulled up Instagram photos of home-cooked meals tagged with the apartment's location, posted by a woman named Vanessa Reed. I didn't recognize the name, but the timestamps haunted me. Thanksgiving dinner, posted while Robert was supposedly at his brother's. Birthday celebrations when he'd claimed to be at conferences. Ordinary Tuesday evenings when he'd texted that he was working late. "There's more," Sarah said quietly. "The financial irregularities you noticed? They're just the tip of the iceberg." She showed me banking records that revealed a pattern of large transfers to offshore accounts, business expenses for meetings that never happened, and most alarmingly, investment accounts opened with forged signatures. My forged signatures. "This crosses into potential identity theft," Sarah explained. "He's been moving company funds through accounts allegedly co-signed by you." The realization hit me like a physical blow. Robert hadn't just been unfaithful, He'd potentially been setting me up to take the fall for financial crimes. Is that why he wanted a divorce now? I whispered. Possibly. The company audit is scheduled for February. Sarah's expression was grim. The timing would make sense. We spent the next 3 hours methodically going through everything the investigation had uncovered. The separate phone Robert maintained for his other life. The vacations he'd taken with Vanessa while I thought he was at sales conferences. The gradual siphoning of money from his company into untraceable investments. What happens now? I asked, feeling numb as we finished reviewing the evidence. That depends on what you want, Sarah replied. There's enough here for criminal charges, but also for a civil case if you prefer to handle this privately. The doorbell interrupted our conversation. Through the peephole, I saw Robert standing on our porch, looking haggard but defiant. Sarah quickly packed up her laptop and slipped into the kitchen, out of sight but within earshot, her presence providing both witness and protection. You've made your point, Robert announced as soon as I opened the door. This house nonsense, the eviction, very dramatic. Time to be reasonable now. His condescending tone, so familiar after years of subtle belittlement, suddenly seemed transparent. I could see through him completely, every lie, every manipulation visible like text highlighted on a page. I think we're past reasonable, I said calmly, stepping aside to reveal the dining table covered with printed copies of his secret life. Hotel receipts. Bank statements. Photos from Vanessa's social media showing them together at the apartment in Millfield. The color drained from his face. You had no right to. No right. I interrupted, my voice steady. You forged my signature on investment accounts. You created financial records in my name without my knowledge. You were setting me up to take the fall when the embezzlement was discovered. His expression shifted from shock to calculation. You can't prove anything. Sarah chose that moment to step into view, her badge now visible on her belt. Actually, she can, Mr. Thompson. We have quite a comprehensive paper trail. Robert's face contorted with rage and fear, an ugly combination that made me wonder how I'd ever found him handsome. This is a personal matter, he hissed. You had no business bringing outsiders into it. That's rich coming from the man who served divorce papers at a dinner party, I replied, surprising myself with the flash of dark humor. Consider this meeting over. Your belongings will be packed and ready for pickup on January 15th as legally required. Any attempt to enter this property before then will be considered trespassing. After he left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the Christmas wreath, Sarah placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. You know what's strange? I said, watching through the window as Robert's car disappeared down the street. I feel sad but not about losing him. I'm mourning the years I spent doubting myself, thinking his dismissal of my dreams was somehow justified. Sarah nodded, understanding. The unraveling is just the beginning. The rebuilding is where you'll find yourself again. As the winter sunset painted our neighborhood in shades of gold and purple, I realized the web of lies Robert had constructed over the years had finally collapsed under its own weight. And somehow, in preparing for the worst, I'd accidentally prepared myself for something much better. Freedom. The week between Christmas and New Year's passed in a blur of legal consultations and emotional excavation. I'd always imagined that discovering a spouse's betrayal would feel like drowning, gasping for air, struggling to surface. Instead, I experienced it as a peculiar lightness, as if shedding a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. This is common, my therapist Angela explained during our emergency session 2 days after Christmas. When deception ends, even painfully, there's often relief mixed with the grief. I'd never considered therapy before. Robert had dismissively called it expensive complaining. Now, sitting in Angela's sunlit office with its comfortable chairs and gentle atmosphere, I wondered what other helpful things he had steered me away from over the years. I keep waiting to fall apart, I admitted, tracing the pattern on her couch with my fingertip. Shouldn't I be more devastated? Angela smiled gently. You've been grieving your marriage in installments for years, Emma. Part of you recognized the truth long before you had evidence. He was right. Each unexplained absence, each dismissive comment about my bakery, each financial deception had chipped away at my love until what remained was merely habit, not attachment. The Christmas Eve spectacle had simply shattered the final illusion. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends who had witnessed Robert's cruelty. Jessica organized a rotation of dinner deliveries. Marcus reviewed my legal documents free of charge. Even acquaintances reached out with surprising warmth, the community rallying around me in ways I hadn't anticipated. "You handled yourself with such dignity," my neighbor Elaine said when she brought over a casserole. "We've all seen how he spoke to you at neighborhood gatherings. Like you were a child, not a partner." These comments startled me. Had others noticed what I'd normalized? Had Robert's behavior been obvious to everyone but me? 3 days after Christmas, I unlocked the bakery early morning, seeking comfort in the familiar routine of measuring, mixing, and creating. The space felt like a sanctuary, the one place Robert had rarely visited, claiming the flour bothered his sinuses. Now I understood it was simply because he couldn't control this aspect of my life. My assistant Mia arrived at 6, eyebrows raised in surprise. "We're closed until January 2nd, remember? You approved the holiday schedule months ago." "I know," I said, up to my elbows in dough. "I just needed to be here." Mia hung up her coat and silently tied on an apron. "What are we baking?" By noon, we'd produced enough pastries to fill every countertop. Cinnamon rolls, cranberry scones, chocolate croissants, and my signature maple pecan breakfast rolls. The physical act of creation had cleared my mind in ways that conversation couldn't. "Let's donate these to the women's shelter," I suggested. "It seems fitting somehow." Mia helped load everything into my car. At the shelter, the director's eyes widened at our delivery. "This is incredible," she said. "Most of our residents had a difficult Christmas. This will brighten their New Year's." As I arranged pastries on platters in the shelter's dining area, a woman about my age approached hesitantly. "Are you the baker?" she asked. I nodded. "I left my husband 3 months ago," she confided. "He said I'd never survive without him. Never amount to anything." The echo of Robert's words in her story created an immediate connection between us. "Mine said my bakery was just a hobby," I replied, right before I evicted him from the house I'd purchased. Her startled laugh turned heads across the room. "You bought the house. In your name." "The best decision I ever made," I confirmed. We exchanged numbers before I left. That evening I started a group text with her, Sarah, Diane, and Angela, women who had each played a role in my awakening. "Survival Strategies and Success Stories," I titled it. The legal battle began in earnest after New Year's. Robert's attorney contacted mine, demanding half the value of our home and a percentage of my suddenly successful business. The condescension dripped from every paragraph of their letter. "He doesn't have a case," my attorney assured me. "The house is solely in your name, purchased with your separate funds. The business was established with your capital and labor." Still, Robert persisted, filing motions and making increasingly desperate claims. Each legal notification triggered a flutter of anxiety, but no longer paralyzed me with fear. "He's hoping you'll settle just to avoid the hassle," Sarah explained during our weekly coffee meetup. "Classic intimidation tactic." In my kitchen one evening, sorting through drawers to pack up Robert's remaining items, I found a small notebook I didn't recognize wedged behind the silverware tray. Inside were lists of passwords, account numbers, and balances. A meticulously maintained record of our financial life together, all in my handwriting. Except I had never created such a notebook. The handwriting, though similar to mine, showed subtle differences upon closer inspection. The implications chilled me. Robert had been practicing forging my handwriting likely for years. "This changes everything," Sarah said when I showed her the notebook. "This is premeditated identity theft." The discovery shifted the legal dynamics entirely. Robert's aggressive posturing suddenly transformed into settlement offers and requests for discretion. 6 weeks after Christmas, I sat in my attorney's office reviewing the final divorce agreement. Robert would vacate all claims to the property and business in exchange for my silence regarding his financial crimes. Sarah had reluctantly agreed that this resolution, while imperfect, spared me a prolonged court battle. "You could pursue criminal charges," my attorney reminded me. "The evidence is substantial." I considered the emotional cost of extended legal proceedings against the freedom of a clean break. "I want to move forward, not backward," I decided. His real punishment will be living with himself. That evening I painted my home office, formerly Robert's domain, a bright, hopeful yellow. As the fresh color covered the gray he had insisted upon, I felt a physical transformation mirroring my emotional one. The house was becoming truly mine, room by room, choice by choice. The aftermath of betrayal had revealed an unexpected truth. I was more capable, more resilient, and more whole than I had ever realized. The awakening wasn't just about discovering Robert's lies. It was about rediscovering the strength I had possessed all along. Spring arrived with a gentle persistence that mirrored my own rebirth. As cherry blossoms dotted the neighborhood trees, sweet foundations expanded into the converted garage space I'd always envisioned as a second location. The renovation had taken 6 weeks. New ovens, gleaming countertops, a small seating area where customers could enjoy pastries with coffee. "We need to talk about scaling production," Mia said during our morning planning session. "The downtown cafe wants to increase their order by 30%, and that's before we even announce the new space." What had once been Robert's cute hobby commentary now materialized as spreadsheets showing steady growth, profit margins that attracted investor interest, and a waiting list for specialty cake orders stretching 2 months ahead. "I've been thinking about something," I told Mia, sliding the blueprint for the garage space toward her. "What if we specialize this location for baking classes? Keep production at our original site, but use this space to share skills." The idea had germinated during my visits to the women's shelter. So many residents expressed interest in learning practical skills that could lead to employment. A bakery training program could offer both therapeutic creativity and potential career paths. "Community outreach through cupcakes," Mia grinned. "I love it." By April, we'd launched our first 6-week baking fundamentals course. The registration filled within hours, half with paying customers, half with scholarship students from the shelter and other support organizations. Teaching tapped into something I hadn't realized I'd been missing: the joy of sharing knowledge rather than simply demonstrating competence. Meanwhile, word of Robert's downfall spread through professional circles despite the non-disclosure agreement. His pharmaceutical company had conducted an internal audit, discovering irregularities that extended beyond what I'd uncovered. Last I heard, he'd relocated to Arizona, starting over with significantly diminished circumstances. "Your ex-husband called again," my assistant mentioned one Tuesday morning. "Third time this month." I deleted his voicemail without listening. The settlement was final, the legal ties severed. Whatever crisis prompted his calls wasn't my emergency anymore. The monthly financial literacy workshop I'd started at the community center became unexpectedly popular. What began as a small group of women cautiously discussing budgets had evolved into a vibrant community supporting each other through financial challenges and celebrations alike. "You should write a book," suggested Elaine, who had become both a regular workshop participant and a close friend. "So many women need to hear your story." "Maybe someday," I replied, though the idea took root. Not as a revenge narrative, but as a practical guide to financial self-protection woven through with personal experience. On a sunny May morning, a distinguished-looking man with salt and pepper hair entered the bakery just as I finished arranging a display of raspberry tarts. "Those look incredible," he said, his warm voice carrying a slight accent I couldn't place. "Are they as delicious as they are beautiful?" "Better," I promised, selecting the perfect tart and placing it on a plate. "Coffee." His name was Thomas, a literature professor at the local university who had wandered in after smelling fresh bread while walking his dog. He returned the next day and the day after that, each visit extending into longer conversations about books, baking, and gradually our lives. "My late wife loved to bake," he shared one afternoon. "I've avoided bakeries for 2 years because the smell reminded me too much of her. Then I found yours." The delicate honesty of his grief touched something in me. Here was someone who understood loss not as something to overcome, but as part of the continuing story. Our friendship developed slowly, naturally, without pressure or expectation. Thomas brought books he thought I'd enjoy. I sent him home with experimental recipes. When he finally asked me to dinner 3 months after our first meeting, it felt like the logical next chapter rather than a new beginning. "I'd like that," I said simply. In July, Robert made one final attempt at reconciliation. I was locking up the bakery when his car pulled into the parking lot. He looked thinner, less polished than the man who had once dismissed my dreams over Christmas dinner. "You've done well for yourself," he said, gesturing toward the expanded bakery with its cheerful sign and bustling activity even at closing time. I agreed, neither hostile nor welcoming. I made mistakes, he continued. Vanessa left. The company settled, but my reputation is shot. I've been thinking about us, about starting over. The old Emma might have felt vindicated by his desperation, or worse, considered his offer. The woman I'd become recognized his approach for what it was. Another attempt at finding security at someone else's expense. There is no us to consider, Robert. Hasn't been for a long time. His face hardened. You couldn't have built all this without what I taught you. I laughed, the sound genuine and free. You taught me plenty. Just not what you intended. As his car disappeared down the street, I felt the final thread connecting us dissolve completely. The story Robert and I had written together was finished. Had been finished long before that Christmas Eve revelation. 1 year after the divorce papers across the Christmas dinner table, I hosted a holiday gathering in my home. Friends who had witnessed the destruction of my marriage now celebrated its aftermath. The growth, the community, the unexpected joy that had risen from those painful crumbs. Thomas helped me arrange platters of cinnamon stars and gingerbread. His steady presence a reminder that some endings create space for healthier beginnings. Sarah brought her new baby, conceived through a donor after deciding to become a single mother. Diane arrived with her wife, both offering warm hugs and financial planning jokes. As we gathered around the table, the same table where Robert had tried to humiliate me, I raised my glass. To foundations, I said. The ones we build for ourselves and the ones we create together. The chorus of voices echoing my toast filled the room with something better than revenge, more sustaining than justice. It was the sound of a community rising together, stronger for having weathered life's unexpected storms, sweeter for appreciating the joy on the other side.